What is going on, busy bariatrics, and thanks for coming back for another episode. If you listened to the last episode, you'll know that we talked about the power of habit building and how we kind of coach it in our busy method through busy bariatrics. Today, we're going to get to the you in our busy method and really talk about understanding nutrition. Now, if we're really looking at the grand scheme of things, that could probably be a 52-part series. So today, I'm really just going to share a little bit more about my journey, how I learned to understand nutrition, where my coaching came from, my philosophy, and everything that came, and kind of boil it down to one quick and simple episode. I'm sure we will be listening to a lot more about nutrition, behavior change, and science, but for today, I really just want to give you the grand scheme of things and give you an idea of how we coach it in busy bariatrics and also how I found effective strategies around it. I'm also going to share with you what my biggest revelation was when it came to nutrition and how it completely changed my bariatric journey. So, let's start off with the most important thing of why do we need to know about nutrition? I think the biggest mistake I see so many people do in their bariatric journey is they make this assumption that the surgery is going to do all the work for them, and that because the sleeve will keep them restricted for as long as they will, they're never going to have to worry about food choices because the sleeve will do all the work. In my own personal opinion, I couldn't think of a wronger way of how that went for me. I will be the first to admit that was my own personal narrative, is that the sleeve will save me and that does all the work and I just have to show up. And I learned that lesson really the hard way when I was able to eat a Whopper um, about 2 months after surgery. So I got surgery in June. I went golfing in August with my buddy Kevin, and I had my protein shake on the way out there, but I did not plan on the way back, and I found myself stopping for Burger King. Stopping for Burger King 2 months post op should probably be a red flag. But the scarier part was not only was I able to eat the burger, yes, it took me like 4 sittings of I had a quarter of it because I was home alone that day. I ate another quarter a half an hour later, another quarter half an hour later, finished like a burger in close to 2 hours. I realized that I could kind of eat whatever I want. And that was the scarier part for me, was that I could eat whatever I wanted. That was not good for me mentally. What even caused a bigger issue was when I hopped on the scale the next day and I still lost 2 pounds. The next 6 months became this fun little game that I was playing with myself, which was incredibly dumb on my part, where it was almost like I was doing fast food challenges to seeing what I could eat and what I could get away with. I would have Wendy's breakfast and still lose a pound. I could have McDonald's for late night and I could still lose a pound. I could eat Taco Bell for midday and I could still lose 2 pounds. Living Moss actually caused me to lose less, but because I was eating it in such small portions and doing so much of the work, I really didn't think it mattered because I was able to burn it off and still lose weight. That really caused me to hit my first stall by the time I hit February and started to freak out. I realized how painfully unaware I was with my nutrition and realized that I had to make a lot of changes if I really wanted this to last long term. When we talk about our understanding of nutrition, it's also important to understand the science of behavior change when it comes around nutrition. What was happening was a very nasty cue reward loop during that story I just told you. The cue essentially was I was eating fast food, and the reward was I was still losing weight. This kind of caused a trigger in your body and also when it comes to your habits that allows you to make these choices. Now, the good news is just as quickly as you can build a bad habit, you can actually build a really good habit as well. But at this point, I was really doing bad habits. Even prior to surgery, look back at the story that I told of I would play chores where I would get a chore done, I would drink a beer. Um, it was sending the wrong cue reward loop of if I do something, I can reward with a negative consequence of behavior. And a lot of the times, this is something that is learned, it's developed, it happens over time and from your environment. And this came from the idea of celebrating with alcohol or food, mourning with food or alcohol, and doing everything in between. The more that I started to realize that I was putting these negative reward loops in place, the easier it was for me to realize I just had to like rewire it in my head and find more positive rewards. The problem though was it took the stall to realize like that fast food really wasn't serving me a purpose anymore and that I'd have to change the reward loop. So something I had to do was figure out healthy sources of dopamine. And that'll be a whole nother episode of how we did that. But for this point, I realized that I could not use the cue reward of having fast food and losing weight. I had to start actively realizing that having fast food was causing a stall at a certain point. The other way that I changed my cue reward rate was I started tracking my food. This was something that I did a little bit prior to bariatric surgery and continued, but then I realized that although the math can math and you can still eat fast food, I still wasn't getting the same results as when I looked at my data and saw when I stopped eating fast food. Small things like that allowed me to make the adjustments early on that got me a lot of the results that I wanted. And that's where the behavior change really comes into it. How I learned it better was through tracking macros and calories. So prior to bariatric surgery, I had tracked religiously for a lot of things. I had a food journal as a high schooler. I would log my food early on when I started, and I had some success with Weight Watchers because everything had points, but I could never really figure out how the points worked or what caused you to get a point or not get a point. So, like for an example, I knew like broccoli was like 0 points. So I could eat like a whole bunch of broccoli, but like cheese was 2 points. So if I ate like cheddar broccoli in my logical mind, I could probably eat like 2 cups of cheese and spend 20 points. And the broccoli was 0 points, and that could be a meal of just eating like cheesy broccoli. Again, it's kind of like a bad version of like they say girl math or boy math or dog math when they explain the logic that goes behind it. Dieting math might be some of the worst math that you can do in certain programs because it doesn't necessarily teach you what's going on, how calories work, or anything else happened. Remember when I said we built habits by using the step counter? Well, Fitbit also had a nutrition tracker. So I just started prior to weight loss surgery, I would just start tracking foods. And that was really where I got my first idea of how many calories were in certain foods, how they played a role, and how to stay in a caloric deficit. And the best way that I really learned it, or the most like revelatory way that I learned it, was when I tracked chicken wings for the first time. At 365 pounds, I used to think I was making a healthy choice by eating chicken wings. I'm going to say that again. The math or the logic that I thought was this is chicken, buffalo sauce has 0 calories, this has got to be relatively healthy. Instead of eating pizza all day Sunday for an Eagles game, if I just ate the most amount of chicken wings, I could be in shape. Now, keep in mind, I live in Philadelphia. We had this event for like a quarter century called the Wing Bowl, where people would eat the most amount of chicken wings possible, and they would win like this grand prize. And I'm pretty sure if you go back and look at all the winners of the Wing Bowl, there are very few that have a physique or that looks like a bodybuilder. But somehow in my head, I was like, chicken is healthy. It's a wing. There's less meat. So this has got to be some level of healthiness when we go with all of it. So I tracked a chicken wing for the first time, and I realized like this isn't even a good protein source. There's like twice as much fat in a chicken wing than there is protein. And that made me come to the conclusion of like, oh, I got to kind of figure this out. So I tried other things with chicken to see which was better. Well, thighs were better than chicken wings when it came to the protein to fat ratio. So I started eating more chicken thighs. Well, breast was better than thigh. So I started eating more chicken breast. Chicken breast was boring, and I got depressed eating it because there wasn't enough fat content. So I'd settle on chicken thighs and just make a deal of this is the amount of chicken thighs I would eat to hit my protein goal. Small things like that of just learning and understanding and seeing the proteins, carbs, and fats in each product really allows you to start making healthier choices and realize, is this something that's really on plan, or is this something that's throwing our plan off? So chicken wings, I always joke, I probably owe the most of my nutritional knowledge of, because it really did allow me to start to understand how does it work, how do we develop these patterns, and how do we make sure that we are tracking everything and that it's working towards our plan. When I had bariatric surgery, the next step that we really worked on was how was I going to eat? And the first tracking that I did there was just in quarter cups at a time. And I still remember putting a quarter cup of refried beans into the cup thing. Then I would dump it out onto a plate. I would add Mexican taco sauce seasoning or a taco packet. I'd stir it all up. I'd put it back in the quarter. I'd shave off the top part, throw it out. And that was like my meals for the first time, was like just eating refried beans on that level. Learning how to use measuring cups was such an important part of this process. So I could really understand how my body was working and how I was developing and say, okay, I can eat about 3/4 of a cup of this, 1 cup of this, and 1 cup of that. And that would kind of make my formula. In the first 3 months, though, everything was essentially a quarter cup. If I had chicken, it was in a quarter cup. If it was broccoli, I'd have like a quarter cup. If I tried to have chicken and broccoli, it almost always went poorly. And that's just because I didn't have a lot of volume, and you would have everything come back up. As I got on, though, you start to learn the exact balance of how much that you have through trial and error. And I realized like a quarter of a cup was a really good measuring start for me, because that could give me a gauge of it, what we had to do, and where we went from there. As I started to expand and I could eat more, I would start to combine quarter cups. So I would take like that quarter cup of rice or quarter cup of beans, and I would add a quarter cup of ground turkey when I was allowed to eat full meal. And that was like heaven. The one of the thing that you'll learn from bariatric surgery is after you get out of purees and you can eat actual food again, it's almost like getting out of food prison, but it's kind of dangerous because you'll go to eat a portion like you used to eat it. And if you eat it too quickly, it just comes right back up. So, like taco meat was a simple one. Like ground turkey taco meat was something that I thought was healthy, not realizing it was 80% lean. So it was actually like some low quality as far as the fat content was super high. Um, and I would eat a quarter cup and I would essentially be full. So I would slowly go like, okay, so now I'd have a quarter cup of beans, quarter cup of turkey, quarter cup of rice, and start to add that all together. And as I slowly started to go through, I realized that I could combine these options and kind of make meals that worked for me. And that was for the first 3 months kind of how I operated. Especially when we got to maintenance, I did the same. After about a year, I kind of hit like that point where I could eat whole foods and certain volumes, and I'd start with just doing 5 ounces at a time, slowly going up to 6, going up to 7, focusing on my hunger cues and still losing weight. And that was a really good way of slowly ramping up, because after the cups and a certain amount, I just started measuring by putting my whole plate on the measuring, the food scale. And then I would just weigh out, okay, I know I have to hit this amount of protein. I need like 20 grams of protein. Let me put this on my plate. And I'd be like, okay, that's like 3 ounces of chicken, give or take. Don't quote me. I don't have it off the top of my head. Okay, so now that I have that chicken there, what else do I want to add for a little bit of volume? It'd be like, okay, let me put some broccoli on there. Okay, I should probably have a different carb. And I would add rice. By putting all of that together, it allowed me to start to slowly increase my volume while still keeping relatively on point, while still adding vegetables and everything else to the mix. One of the more interesting parts of me learning how to eat and understand nutrition was when I finally wanted to build muscle, and I worked with my registered dietitian, Kim Terapelli. Part of working with Kim was we were going to map out what my fullest food capacity could be. And we went from starting at a base level of 1,200 calories a day, which is where I was starting at the time, and we got all the way up to 3,600 calories. That'll be a whole story that maybe I'll bring Kim on for a whole nother day and we'll go through. But by learning how to incorporate volume and eating healthy while doing it, I understood the importance of eating a large amount of foods that would work for my goal while still getting me the results that I wanted. Finally, when we got up to 250 pounds for our bulk, so going from 220 to 250, we came back down and started with a general caloric deficit. So we'd go from 3,600 to 3,200, we'd lose 10 pounds. We would readjust from 3,200 to close to 28, and we would slowly ramp down and get ourselves back to where our level was. During that time, we also started to do a couple different things from the training end that I did, but it allowed me to see all the different ranges and stages that we had when it came to nutrition. After that, I started working with another coach, and we started to get into physique building and developing and fat loss techniques that I still use with my clients today. But by developing all of that, it allowed me to kind of get a better idea of how to fully control my body, how tracking allowed me to work almost on a budget, and how certain habits, patterns, and behaviors that if I really worked to could really have a positive effect for me. So, the big question I get is, okay, Rob, it works for you. How do you teach it to your clients? And that's a really good question, because I think for a lot of people out there, they either don't know where to start in their bariatric journey when it comes to tracking, they don't know how to track properly, and they may have a little bit of a struggle of, how do I do this every single day? So let's go through some things that worked for me and how we found a way to get a process together. So when we start working with clients in Busy Bariatrics, the first thing that I have them do is just track openly and honestly with their nutrition with an app that we like to use. There's a lot of reasons for this, and it's also like a little bit of science and a little bit of logic. Is one, every surgical center kind of has a slightly different way of how they do their procedure, what someone's food intake may look somewhat different for a 7th month post-op if they did it at a Philadelphia hospital as opposed to a New York hospital or a Florida or a West Coast. You get the idea. So every surgeon does it differently, and there's no surgeon that necessarily does it wrong unless there's gross negligence. I think a lot of the times people will say that their surgeon didn't do the surgery right, and it's because they say they have no restriction. And I'll be like, well, have you gotten tests to actually prove, like, did your stomach expand? Did they do the surgery properly? Or is it that we're just not focusing on the right nutritional aspects? I get to all those points, and those are like full subjects for another day. But a lot of the times, I just really like to see my clients and see what does a week, a weekend, and a week of eating look like, as well as how accountable are to yourself with me just giving a base level command. The first 2 weeks can almost be isolating in some senses, because a lot of clients think like, oh, we're going to start with workouts and do like 5 days a week workouts, and we're going to do anything. And in reality, it's a lot of paperwork, but more importantly, it's a lot of focusing on just making sure we have the clear habit of nutrition. So when we do our first check-ins and touch bases, it's really just a lot of like, how is your tracking going and where do we go from there? After we get them comfortable with tracking, we also identify their struggles. So for many clients, it can be something as simple as like, oh, I'm really good tracking Monday to Thursday, and then I got tired and I didn't do it on the weekend. Okay, perfect. The first thing we're going to do is start tracking our weekend intake, and we're going to do it again. Okay, we got the weekend intake down. All right, now that we have like a really good look of how you eat on the week as opposed to how you eat on the weekends, we can start to tailor the macros to work in the caloric range that works for you, and then adjust accordingly based on everything that we're doing. And that can take, for some clients, 2 weeks. Other clients, it can take 2 months to get that macro tracking down properly based on how often they're doing it, how often they're building it, and how often they're open to feedback. But a lot of it really does come down to, if we're going to get the scale to move, as good as the workouts can be, it's going to come down to your nutrition, your complacency, and how you find a way to make everything work. The other cool thing is, from talking to other coaches, there's something that's almost called the honeymoon phase, just like you have in your bariatric journey when you work with a coach. So when you're in the honeymoon phase, think of it from your bariatric process. You're probably making all the right food choices. You're not bringing candy into the house. You're not letting the weekend affect you. You're taking Tupperware containers to your holiday events, or at least that was just me. But then as time wears on, that honeymoon phase kind of wears off, and it's like, well, do I really need to bring Tupperware to my house? Can I have a couple chips here and there and still be at the same weight that I want to be? And all of a sudden, like, we get out of that honeymoon phase and we get to see where the real work happens. The more that we start to see that in our clients' trackers, the better we're able to adjust the macros and get them results based on what we're seeing, feeling, and hearing. So by tracking, it allows us to get an idea of what are you actually spending calorically, as far as what are you eating, and then what are you spending and exerting throughout that work. So as we do that, we then teach our clients, here's how you hit your protein goal while working in a caloric deficit. And this can be a really tricky part for a lot of clients because a lot of surgical centers or the internet will say like peanut butter has protein in it. That's a protein source. And yes, peanut butter does have protein in it, but it actually has more fat than it does protein. The same is true with cheese. I will save you the trouble of the consult. If you are stuck in a stall and you are not tracking, the first thing we will tell you to do, just start tracking and see where your numbers are. The second thing, when we review data, the number one thing that we see most clients dealing with is their fat content is a little too high and their protein is actually a little lower than where they think that it is going to be. So there's a couple pieces of free advice that may help is check and see what you're doing and go from there. This allows us to really open up the conversation of finding lean proteins that we like, meals that work nutritionally, and making sure that we have everything that we need. And then that's really where the tweaking and tinkering works from, is getting a feel from that. As clients start to get an idea of where those numbers go, we start to open it up and add the other macronutrients of carbs and fats. This can get like really tricky based on the client, as well as in my process of based on how we like to operate, what our food preferences are. Some people prefer to be higher carb, lower fat. Other people like higher fat, lower carb. There's really no true wrong answer to how you build out your macro profile, as long as you do it within a caloric deficit and you find something that works for you. Do I think it's 100% easier to do it on high lean protein? Yeah, and that's my opinion on it. And that will keep you fuller for longer, in my own opinion. But we do work with clients on any range of what their eating styles are and explain how they have to portion it to get it to there. That really can take anywhere from like 2 weeks to 2 months again to really get that full process down based on the data we're seeing. And the cool part is, while we're going through that, we're seeing holidays, we're seeing birthday parties, we're seeing vacations, we're seeing time with loved ones. All those things are adding up and developing into what we want to have so we can get the proper results that we want. After that, we really do teach about how to advance track. And through advanced tracking, we give you a really good idea of, okay, if we know a holiday is coming up and we know these are the foods we want to have, how do we put it in our tracker so that we reflect that we still either want to be in a caloric deficit or how to be in maintenance? This sometimes can be really tricky because for a lot of clients, they will say that they don't really know what they're going to eat the next day. And then I'll be like, well, we've kind of looked at your food log for the last 3 weeks and you have the same breakfast every day. So just punch that in. And they're like, oh, yeah, I do kind of eat the same breakfast every day. And then I'm like, you're really having some form of a sandwich for lunch every day. So why don't we just plug the sandwich in for the day? Oh, yeah, you're right. I do have some version of turkey or ham or, if you're in the New Jersey area, you have your gabagool and all your fine Italian cured meats. And you realize, like, oh, well, maybe if I'm having all the cured meats, if I'm going out to dinner, maybe I go for turkey as an option. So having like these templates that we can kind of work on through what you've already developed and worked with us allow us to still incorporate the foods that you love in a moderation level so that you don't feel restricted. And that also helps you make sure that you do not have this level of restriction that can later lead to rebellion, which in return can cause you to get this all or nothing mindset, which then says, well, because I ate a little bit off plan, I might as well go fully off plan. And then next thing you know, you're in this massive caloric surplus. By doing these small minor tweaks and doing it over an implementable amount of time, many clients don't even feel or notice that we're adjusting too much because we're not rehauling your diet off of day one. From my own personal experience, like I've had my diet rehauled and thrown over multiple times. And when that happened, it just really did not get the same results that I wanted or anything that I needed. So that really is where we learn how to advance track. The next part of the process is really teaching reason and season. After bariatric surgery, your first year in Honeymoon, you absolutely are in a caloric deficit, and you probably should be based on if you're doing the process and allowing the sleeve to do the work for you. As you come into maintenance, you kind of have to adjust what you do as well as how you're going to move things through. So we start to really work on, okay, are we in a fat loss season? Are we in a maintenance season? Are we in a muscle building season? For so many people, developing those patterns and realizing that we should not be dieting all year round is going to make a much better result as we go longer and bigger picture. So when we get into maintenance, we really only like to really have our clients in a fat loss phase for anywhere from like 6 to 8 weeks, and try to really get in and get out, and then really get them right back up to maintenance so that their metabolism can adjust back to the higher number, and we can get everything else. And then depending on the reason season, it comes down to like what types of months work best for you as a client. So we will do a lot of mapping for the year. And for me, for an example, my 3 worst months are going to be September, because I am back to school, and that is just a very hectic schedule to get the kids back on schedule. My wife coaches field hockey, which she absolutely loves. And I am usually closing out coaching summer camp for all my clients, as well as working a full time job as a teacher, which I absolutely love. So it's not like any of those stressors are bad in my life, but they are a little bit overwhelming, and they do play a part of it. So getting all that together allows me to realize September is not a good month. May is the exact opposite in reverse. So that is when we are starting to close out the school year, final grades are due, all of the work and effort needs to be done, and that plays a pretty big part. And then we're starting up summer camp. So it's like my highest stress month of coaching is kind of seeing how many campers we're going to have. Do we have enough giveaways? Are all the speakers in place? Do we have all the journals and everything published? It is a whole bunch of work. And yeah, it's absolutely rewarding, but like it is tedious, and it's one of those that you have to make sure every single part is done. So when you get both of those parts done, it really realizes like there's always one other month that's just super bad for me. Usually it's February, because it's my birthday month. It's a little bit colder. I celebrate a whole lot more. It starts usually with the Super Bowl and ends with my birthday around the 15th, where it's like 2 weeks where I feel like I'm constantly going out to eat. It's another meal out. It's another meal off plan. So just even scratching and surviving helps. So by knowing that those 3 months are my worst, kind of building around it and having an idea of like, okay, if these are your 3 worst months, let's maybe not try to go into a fat loss phase. Let's up our calories a little bit, stay in maintenance, and kind of see how that works. Then we figure out our 3 best months. So for me, it really is June, July, and August are my 3 best, which is why I tend to traditionally make those my fat loss months, because it's a little bit warmer out, there's more fresh produce, and everything just seems to align. Plus, only working one job feels like I'm practically on vacation every day. So the combination of having all those together really allows me to have the best feel for what we are doing. Um, and that's a really good part. So those are my 3 months. The other months, depending on how I'm feeling, or if there are photo shoots, public appearances, commercials, pilots that I'm shooting, that then really will determine the reason and season. So I might do like a 30-day reset and then come out of maintenance and do like mini cuts based on what the material is. But having almost like this calendar of when is a fat loss phase, when should be a maintenance phase, really will help you get a better idea of what the reason and season is, as well as like just keeping you out of this idea that you need this fatigue level when it comes to everything. That gets me to my final point. Not everyone is going to be doing a photo shoot. Not everyone is going to be shooting a commercial. There should be a level of just nutrition for life where you should get to your comfortable weight and learn how to surf it. I always say that's the final masterclass when it's working with a client, is when we get to a certain weight that is working, we want to really make sure that we make sure this thrives and that it gets everything for yourself. So that really covers the whole idea of how we kind of coach it and how we take you, I say, from like womb to boom, where you have the basic understandings of tracking all the way up to finally the food freedom, where you're getting off the tracker and just developing a life and a lifestyle that works for you. And that's really the biggest part that I wanted to cover for today's episode. On next episode, since if you're doing the math and saying we did B last episode, you is this episode, next episode we're going to talk about the importance of staying active in your bariatric journey. So if you like what you hear, please feel free to give us a 5-star rating and review. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe. And If you leave a review on your podcast player, you will be eligible for a free giveaway that goes with that. Also, another thing, if you're thinking like, how should I start my macros? How should I get a better understanding of nutrition? We do offer a free metabolic assessment, which will be right in the links of the show notes for this, where you can get a quick understanding of how do your macros work, how does your diet balance itself out, and how we can optimize your bariatric journey. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me on Instagram. And if you're telling, I didn't write a closing for this episode, so I am rambling. So as always, keep up the hard work and keep getting busy.